Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a group that pledged to place 50,000 flowers on veterans' gravesites on Memorial Day. Also, the Biden administration has laid out its first proposed budget. Find out who are the winners and losers in the military and defense communities. Cuts to some JETS programs. Our team looks inside the numbers. Finally, NATO exercises in Europe add a new focus, and updates on South Korean missile development. With the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. We have a great show for you this week, kicking off in the Navy. Nearly 4 years after two fatal ship collisions that later found crew exhaustion as a factor, surface fleet sailors are still struggling to get adequate rest. A new Government Accountability Office report found that 84% of surface warfare officers believed that fatigue often or sometimes affected ship operations. And while the Navy has rolled out things like circadian rhythm schedules, the service is still failing to ensure sailors get 7.5 hours of sleep a night. And in other news from around the military, soldiers with the 173rd Airborne Brigade mistakenly seized and secured a working olive oil factory in Bulgaria as part of a large-scale NATO exercise. The soldiers entered and cleared a building next to an airfield that they believed was part of their training area, but it was actually occupied by civilians operating a private business. No weapons were fired, and the Army has said it will implement rigorous procedures to clearly define training areas and prevent this type of incident from happening again. Finally, for Memorial Day, one group was out in force with a small army of volunteers with an ambitious goal: place tens of thousands of flowers at graves in Arlington Cemetery. Jesse Karangu has the story.
A day to remember those who protected and served has spurred an annual tradition that carries the holiday spirit. For the past 9 years, Gold Star families and volunteers have come to Arlington National Cemetery to lay flowers on the graves of fallen heroes. Organizers with the Memorial Day Flowers Foundation say the tradition began after workers in the floral industry decided they wanted to take part in commemorating sacrifices made by service members in a special way.
Well, this project actually began in 2011, right after Osama bin Laden was killed. A group of Americans living in Ecuador who all grow flowers there on large flower farms got together and said, we really want to express our patriotism for our country. What if we could take 10,000 roses and take them to Arlington National Cemetery and put them for our fallen troops and get back to the original meaning of Memorial Day?
Amy Nyberger Miller lost her younger brother during the Iraq War. She discovered the organization's work while paying a visit to him.
Know that there's a stranger coming with a flower who will place it for your loved one, who will recognize their service for this country, and do something that's just beautiful and simple in tribute for Memorial Day. And it's very meaningful to know that America hasn't forgotten this service and sacrifice. Memorial Day is not just about mattress sales or going to the beach or some of these other things.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed circumstances for how volunteers are allowed to pay tribute. Last year, 12,000 flowers were given to Gold Star families in a drive-by ceremony with social distancing implemented. Even though more than 50% of the U.S. population is vaccinated, the organization decided to follow similar protocols this time around as well. Arlington National Cemetery still isn't comfortable with large gatherings at their facilities at this time. But this hasn't changed the commitment that volunteers and loved ones of those who've left us want to display.
Many of our volunteers are from military families. Some of them are actively serving in the military or have served recently. And so for them, this is about honoring people they served with, people they know, people that are in their own families sometimes. For others, it's about teaching their children about our country and its values. It's using this as an opportunity to talk about service and sacrifice, what our military does for our country, what our freedoms mean to us. And so this is a great way for a family to come out, to bring out some flowers, to talk about how do we show gratitude for those who've gone before us? How do we talk about service and sacrifice? How do we connect all of this to our history as a country and to our values today? There's a lot of great lessons here, I think, for families that want to come and place flowers and, learn how to recognize and honor those who served and died for our country.
Back in 2019, more than 1,500 volunteers placed 240,000 flowers across Arlington National Cemetery. This year, organizers are saying that 50,000 flowers will be laid on the graves of the nation's fallen service members. The group hopes to expand and honor veterans across the country. For Defense News Weekly, I'm Jesse Karangu.
Thanks, Jesse. When we come back, the latest from the defense industry.
Welcome back. NATO held a multinational exercise, Steadfast Defender 2021, in Romania and Portugal. While these exercises are meant to send a signal to Russia and China, a new country's in the mix, Belarus. The Eastern European country recently used its military to divert a commercial flight and detain a journalist, a move that caught the eye of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
So this just once again demonstrates the nature of the regime in Minsk, where they are willing to crack down and use outrageous actions like the force downing on that plane to crack down on democratic opposition in their own country. Therefore, the North Atlantic Council, NATO, has strongly condemned this act of the Minsk regime. We called for an immediate international independent investigation. And I also welcome the fact that NATO allies, EU and others have implemented sanctions on Belarus to make sure that Belarus is have to pay a cost for this way of acting and behaving against a civilian airline with many passengers.
Stoltenberg spoke aboard the HMS Queen Elizabeth and stopped short of linking Belarus with Russia, whose actions he also condemned.
I will not speculate about the role of Russia, except for saying that we have seen a pattern of behavior also from Russia over the last years, where they have been willing to use poisoning, cyber attacks, attempted coups against, for instance, Montenegro. So we have seen a pattern of behavior which is of great concern also when it comes to Russia.
Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko on his yacht off the coast of Sochi while the exercise took place. A total of 11 NATO partner countries took part in Steadfast Defender 2021, and it had a notable push in maritime operations with more than 150 flights. There were 18 F-35B Lightnings, including 10 from the United States Marine Corps. NATO uses these exercises to ensure partner troops and emerging technologies work together while sending a message to potential adversaries.
It's important for NATO to deliver these exercises because it's an absolute demonstration of our capability and our ability to integrate with our closest allies across NATO. So you have to do that in exercises to have the confidence that everything works together seamlessly as we would hope and expect come a time of war or tension where we'd want to deliver the exercise.
It's important for the U.S. to be involved in NATO exercises and working with our allies across the Atlantic, because as the old Afghan proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We're going to go much further if we work together as allies than if any one of us were to work individually. And so our ironclad relationship with NATO and all of our NATO allies is really important to the United States.
And some more defense industry headlines. South Korea can now develop ballistic missiles capable of reaching targets far beyond the Korean peninsula, following the United States' approval to lift a 42-year-old restriction on its allies' missile development program. South Korean and U.S. leaders announced the termination of the missile guidelines imposed on Seoul in 1979, At the time, South Korea wanted to acquire American technology to develop its own missiles, and in return, the Asian nation agreed to limit the range of its missiles to 180 kilometers with a maximum payload of 500 kilograms. In the face of increasing threats from North Korea, the guidelines have been revised 4 times. Without the restrictions on missile ranges, observers believe South Korea is likely to prioritize the development of intermediate-range ballistic missiles with a maximum range of 1,000 to 5,000 kilometers, capable of reaching targets beyond the Korean peninsula. The Air Force Research Laboratory's Space Vehicles Directorate recently opened a space research and development lab at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. The $12.8 million Space Warfighting Operations Research and Development, or SWORD Lab, will be used to track objects in orbit, advance satellite cybersecurity, and develop autonomous capabilities to help space vehicles avoid each other and space debris. That's according to Colonel Eric Felt, the head of AFRL's Space Vehicles Directorate. The 26,000 square foot facility will serve as the home of 65 personnel from AFRL's Space Control Branch. Malaysia says China has sent more than a dozen military transport aircraft on May 31 to the vicinity of disputed shoals in the South China Sea. Those shoals are administered by Malaysia, which scrambled a fighter jet to investigate. The Royal Malaysian Air Force said in a news release that more than a dozen Chinese aircraft approached within 69 miles of Malaysia's coast. The Chinese force approached in a, quote, tactical formation and was first detected by an air defense radar in eastern Malaysia on May 31st. The aircraft failed to respond to several attempts by Malaysian air traffic controllers to contact them, after which the Malaysian Air Force scrambled a jet to intercept and identify them. The flight path of the Chinese aircraft suggests they were likely conducting a long-range airlift surge exercise. China's embassy in Malaysia told Singapore's Channel News Asia that the aircraft were conducting overflights in accordance with international law, stressing that they did not enter Malaysia's territorial airspace. When we come back, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her latest tips. And later, we break down the details of the Biden administration's first defense budget.
On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives insight on the ins and outs of college payment plans.
Congrats, you're going to college. That's an amazing accomplishment. It means you're ready for higher learning and more responsibility. If you have a federal or private student loan to help pay for college, it's important to have a solid repayment plan. Yes, while you're in school. Opting for a repayment plan while you're in school helps you build credit, and setting up automatic payments guarantees you'll pay on time every month. Not to mention, it could get you an interest rate discount too, so ask your lender. If you're working and going to school, you'll need to know what you earn, what you owe, and when bills are due. Basically, you need a budget. That way, you can account for your student loan payment. If you see your payment isn't manageable, reach out to your servicer. They may have solutions to help manage your loan payment. And many offer super low payment options to make it easier on you. Executing this repayment strategy can help shorten the time it takes to pay off your student loan, reduce your overall costs, and boost your credit, which you'll need after grad. So head to college this year with your passion for learning and your plan for financial success.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more of our coverage, head over to Army, Navy, Air Force, and MarineCorpsTimes.com and DefenseNews.com for more stories. And to get the top military stories in your inbox each weekday, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. And give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And when we come back, our extended coverage of the Biden administration's first defense budget. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The Biden administration recently released its first defense budget. Weighing in at $715 billion for Pentagon spending requests, the budget contained large amounts for research, but was dotted with controversial cutbacks. To dig into the details, Military Times' Capitol Hill Bureau Chief Leo Shane has more.
After a long wait, the Biden White House last week unveiled its budget proposal for fiscal 2022, a $6 trillion plan which includes $716 billion for the Department of Defense. Now that's a slight increase from the current year's defense funding levels, but when you account for inflation, the military ends up losing some spending power in the plan. And that's significant because under President Donald Trump, the military saw hefty budget increases each of the last few years. But Biden has said it's time for a reset in budget priorities for the country, and he's investing more in the State Department and other domestic programs. Republicans on Capitol Hill have already blasted that strategy, saying it doesn't give enough money to counter threats like China and Iran. So what does all of this mean for troops? Well, even with the squeeze on military spending, the defense budget represents the largest single funding total for any agency by far. Under the plan, all troops would receive a 2.7% pay raise starting next January. That's the smallest in 3 years, but it matches the projected growth in private sector raises. And it still means about $800 more next year for junior enlisted troops and about $1,400 more for senior enlisted and junior officers. Troops would also see a 3.1% pay boost in their housing allowance next year. Administration officials also emphasized the budget includes more child care options at bases for military families, more money for mental health care, more money for sexual assault prevention, climate change modifications for facilities, and diversity improvement efforts throughout the military. All of those are overarching priorities for the administration, in both the Defense Department and in other departments. Military officials have also touted their largest ever request for research and development funding under the budget plan. The budget calls for a small cut in military end strength, a big change from recent years where the services have added a sizable number of new faces. The Army would lose almost 1,000 folks, the Navy and Marine Corps would see cuts of a few thousand. Now that doesn't mean that anyone's getting forced out of the ranks, but it is notable because retention levels are at historic highs, so reenlistment bonuses and other incentives could take a hit as competition for those spots heat up. The Air Force and the new Space Force would both grow under the plan, adding around 2,000 service members each. For a deeper dive into those departments, we turn to Valerie Encina, Senior Air Warfare Reporter for Defense News. Val, the Air Force and the Space Force seem to be the big winners in this plan, with more money and more people than the other services, but it still sounds like we're going to see a lot of cuts there.
Yeah, so the Space Force, it's a very good news story. They're getting a bump on pretty much any measurable way that you could look at this, whether that's, research and development, procurement, manpower. The Air Force, the story is a little bit more mixed. Basically, what the Air Force has decided is, hey, let's sacrifice a little bit of our near-term capability and capacity and hopefully be able to invest in some next-generation capabilities, things like hypersonics, nuclear, next-generation fighter. So they're planning on retiring over 200 aircraft. That's across 8 fleets. Not any one fleet is going to be retired. But, they are asking for about, 40 A-10s to be retired, about 40 F-15s, another 40 F-16s. These are all things that Congress is going to have to look at pretty closely. And the other thing that I think is going to be kind of a tough sell or a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow for industry is that procurement has actually gone down by 12% compared to last year. So the Air Force is continuing to buy things like the F-35, F-15EX, the KC-46 tanker, but then we've also seen them curbing purchases of the combat rescue helicopter. They're not buying as many as they planned last year. They're not buying any Grey Wolf helicopters. They're buying fewer MC-130s for Special Operations Command. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag here.
So what does all that mean in terms of capability and readiness? I mean, at 200 aircraft, can the Air Force keep fighting with that kind of sizable cut across the force?
Yeah, so I think what the way that they're thinking about it is, hey, we're leaving Afghanistan and we're really pivoting hard toward the Chinese threat. So it's time to make some big changes and to take some risk. And so that's what they're doing. They're trying to take risk across the entire fleet so that they can recoup some savings and put that money elsewhere. So I think this is going to be really unpopular with Congress. And, with these 200 aircraft that they're trying to retire, I don't think that they're going to be able to accomplish all 200 of them. I think that would be very, very tough for Congress to accept. Even if they get half of that, I think they should consider that a major win. And a lot is going to ride on how good are Air Force officials at making their case about the existing fleet or what's left of the existing fleet after these cuts are made in order to fight any sort of contingency that would pop up.
All right, so that's what's going out. What's coming in? What is the Air Force buying new under this plan that airmen and pilots should know about?
So, I mean, it's, some of it is a lot of the same. So F-35s, KC-46 tankers, F-15EX fighters. One thing that is brand new for the entire Defense Department is the Air Force is actually the first service to buy hypersonic missiles that are going to be put into operations. So that missile is called Arrow. They're planning on fielding that next year. And that's going to be an air-to-air weapon that will be carried on aircraft like the B-52 or maybe F-15EX. So that's new. That's a really good news story. They're putting a lot of money into nuclear, next-generation nuclear assets. So the Biden administration is going to take another look at the nuclear arsenal, probably do another nuclear posture review. But the Air Force is not slowing down any of its modernization programs. It's put a lot of money towards the ground-based strategic deterrent, which is the next generation intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're putting a lot of money into B-21, the new bomber, to keep that going. And then they're also putting a lot of money toward the long-range standoff weapon, which is a nuclear missile that can be used at, by aircraft like the B-52 that won't be able to penetrate into enemy airspace, but can stand off and still fire that missile. So those are sort of the big winners.
Well, there's a lot to break down there. I know you're going to be tracking that all year long. Val, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Leo.
And for a closer look at the rest of the defense budget plan, I sat down with Joe Gould, our Congressional Bureau Chief for Defense News. Joe, thanks for joining us. The administration has talked about everything that's in this proposal, but I know the Defense Department has lost a lot of things in here. Talk about what's gotten cut with some of these reductions in defense spending.
Sure. There's about $2.8 billion in equipment that DoD is not going to buy in the proposed budget. Alongside a number of Air Force platforms, we've got 8 ships total for shipbuilding. That means 1 fewer destroyer, a handful of littoral combat ships getting cut, 37 Navy aircraft getting cut. As far as the Army goes, they protected modernization. However, they're going to get back about $3.2 billion that would have been spent in Afghanistan.
All right, so it's a lot of equipment that's not going to get bought here. How is that being taken at the Pentagon? How's that being taken on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think this is beyond what the Pentagon has asked for previously, but we know a number of these cuts have been are some things that the Pentagon's asked for, and we know how the Hill feels about some of those because the Hill's rejected them in the past.
Yeah, and I know Republicans have already said this is too deep. This puts us on bad footing. I mean, what are you hearing there?
Sure. For weeks now, we've been hearing from Republicans that they want to see a 3 to 5% increase above inflation. So they feel that this is inadequate. It's what they think is needed to counter China. And then on the flip side, you have progressives, progressive Democrats who feel like the budget is too high. They'd much rather see that money spent on domestic priorities, particularly after the pandemic.
Well, so I was going to say, Republicans, they mattered during the Trump administration when they held the White House and they held the Senate. Now Democrats hold both chambers of Congress and the White House. Shouldn't it be easy to pass this budget? Shouldn't they all be on the same page?
You would think, but Democrats aren't on the same page with each other. So what that means is that they don't really have a majority there. And so what we've seen in recent years is that moderate Democrats have teamed up with Republicans, and they chart a course together. However, this year the budget came in very late, so it's a compressed time frame and sort of a difficult path to get this thing passed.
So we're looking at maybe Christmas passing this budget? What does that mean if they're that far behind the start of the new fiscal year, which is October 1st?
Right. So if we're behind, it means that they've got to pass stopgap measures, extensions, a continuing resolution is what it's called, in order to keep the government open, to avoid a government shutdown. However, on the flip side, that means no new programs getting started. And so that's a lot of uncertainty for the defense establishment, defense firms, the Pentagon, service members to absorb in a new year with a new president.
So everything folks were hoping might start this fall could slip till Christmas, past Christmas, maybe even next year?
Who knows? Let's wait and find out.
Sounds like a lot for you to keep covering. Sounds like a lot for me to keep covering in the months to come.
Thanks, Leo. That's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.